How's it going, everyone? This is Draoi from another damn level. Today we're going to be continuing on with the Ice Witch build that I introduced about a week ago, I guess. We're going to go over the cooldowns to look out for and some of the combos that come into play when playing this with things like the Frostbow and the Elemental. This is going to be a relatively shorter video, especially compared to like the Arcane Surge build. The complexities of this particular build are pretty low. It's definitely more of an introductory build to the Elementalist as opposed to the Arcane Surge build, which is definitely someone for a veteran, for sure. But we're going to go ahead and go over it and look at a couple of details. Pretty minimal details in this one. So we went over traits and gear last time and showed you how chilled works in this build. Gives us a boost to damage and how we get extra damage for vulnerability being on our opponents, and the kind of some of the AoE potential of this build. Again, this is a hybrid, some damage, some support. It's not great at either, but it can do either one. So you'll have okay healing and okay damage, pretty middle of the road. Okay, so one of the combos in this particular build actually comes with our lesser elemental here. This little guy right here. So let's go into combat, have him attack. We're going to have him use Frozen Ground. Now inside this AoE, when we Ice Blast here, or Frozen Burst, sorry, will give us and our allies in that particular area Frost Aura, which is damage reduction and gives out protection because of our traits. So that's one of the primary combos. Because you're running DD Double Dagger, you're pretty much always going to be in range of your elemental. You're going to be kind of in the front lines with them. So it's got a pretty small cooldown, like it's got a 15-second cooldown, so you can use it while it's up a couple times and grab one of those auras for you and your teammates in there. It doesn't last a really long time, but that's okay. It's still a fair amount of damage reduction, especially if you manage to pop it right before like a large boss hit, or if you're in that capture point in PvP, it can be very useful. One of the other combos we're looking at is trying to pair our vulnerability from Vapor Blade or Conjured Frostbow with our big damage dealers, which is Ice Storm, and then another Ice Storm from Frostbow. So as you can see, Vapor Blade is kind of unique in how it works, because it goes out as a ring and then it comes back to you, which means it actually hits twice as long as there's nothing that it runs into behind it. So as you can see, like, it's hitting multiple guys because they're behind each other. And you can spam this, and you can see you have a pretty fast attack speed, and you can keep 12 stacks of vulnerability just by keeping this Vapor Blade going. So when all else fails, this helps quite a lot, because that's 12% more damage they're taking from vulnerability, and then with our traits they're taking another 20% because they are vulnerable, and because we're in 600 yards or 600 units of them, they're taking an additional 10% damage from our traits in Earth. So that's how Vapor Blade and vulnerability function within this rotation. Generally when everything is down, or you're not healing and you're not giving out auras, you're pretty much going to be using Vapor Blade to keep those stacks up. Because again, this is a partial support build, so you want to keep those stacks up for your teammates, not necessarily yourself. So you can see it can be pretty devastating to a group if you keep rotating through and applying those stacks. It works pretty well. So after you have all those stacks of vulnerability on there, one of the key combos here is to pair that with a Ice Storm and a Conjured Frostbow. So the way that works is we're gonna put a couple stacks of vulnerability on here, get up to about you want to try to get up to your max here, 12, and then you want to come in here and drop a glyph. I messed it up, I didn't let glyph finish casting, and then drop these two together. So I'll do that again, since I messed it up. Now I gotta wait for the cooldowns to go down. Well, while we're waiting for that, we'll go over some of the other Frostbow skills. In PvP, this hard disable is quite nice. You have to hold still to cast it, but it locks in. Like they can't do anything while they're frozen solid, and it works very, very nicely. And it gives them a stack of shields, so you'll be doing extra damage to them as well. So generally, what I'll do is, if it's a problem target that needs to be taken down, I'll deep freeze, and then I will frost volley. And then they'll take 1% more damage for every hit that Frost Volley does, on top of the 7% we get from them being chilled. Okay, so I'm going to show you what this looks like again. So we're going to come in here, we're going to apply our stacks of vulnerability. Say we've been brawling, you know, we've got our stacks up pretty high. We're going to come in here and we're going to drop one of these, and then we're going to drop one of these. And you can see the amount of damage that you can do is actually pretty significant. And you get the bleeding from Ice Storm. You don't do a whole lot of condition damage with this particular build, but it's nice, it's good. Whereas this one applies shield. So every time they get hit, it reapplies a shield stack, which means you're getting that 7% damage increase. And then the vulnerability on top of that for the first couple hits adds more damage because they're vulnerable, which is 1% per stack, and then if you're close enough, generally what I'll do is I'll actually try to get into the middle of the group and drop the Glyph of Storms on top of me and leave me in the center, because if you're off to the side, that means someone can jump out and get you and interrupt your channel of your Ice Storm from your Frostbow, which isn't what you want. So generally it will look like this. So it keeps yourself inside there, and again, you'll notice our numbers are bigger, and that is because we are within 600 units of these targets. So the closer they are to you, the more damage that they're going to take, but the closer they get to you, the more they're going to get hit as well if you keep yourself in the center there. So those are really the key rotations, or the key cooldowns for this particular build. And you can channel them all together. Again, this is a very situational build. Like, it's more about keeping an eye on your surroundings and making sure you get these combo things, like these combo fields for that frost armor, just a little bit of protection, damage reduction, and then those big damage fields. So the vulnerability paired with the Ice Storm and the conjured frostbow can be devastating. The elementals we have here, because every time we use the glyph we get more health regen, which is always great. The big elemental here has a knockdown, actually. So if you target something, it will throw down a healing wave after it kicks someone. See, it kicked it, and now it's gonna healing wave, and you can use that to heal allies and interrupt a takedown in PvP, or you can use it for bosses. And you want to try to stick around these to absorb a lot of damage from projectiles. So see, he threw it down again. Your big one here will throw down one of those ice fields every once in a while. That's random, so you just got to keep an eye out for that. Whereas you can control it with the lesser one. So you want to stick around these guys because they'll do healing, and B, they'll absorb a fair amount of damage. So if you're kind of weaving in between your elementals, so there's the ice field again. See, you give him an aura. You're weaving in between these elementals to absorb a lot of the projectile damage. So if you can get them to surround you, kind of sit on either side of you, and absorb that damage while you're dishing out these huge AoEs, it works great. It works really well. I've been pretty happy with it. One thing to mention, if you are going to take this build into PvP, you can trade out your Glyph of Lesser Elementals for a different glyph. Go here. You can take the Glyph of Elemental Power. The reason I say this is because it's a stun break. So it'll get you out of being knocked down in PvP, which will happen quite a lot. This isn't an optimal PvP build, as it were. It's definitely PvE oriented, but I've done pretty well in PvP with it. I don't have too many complaints. I can survive through quite a lot you don't end up getting a ton of kills with this particular build, but if you can pull off the 2 big AoEs and really nail someone with it, you can certainly turn the tide very quickly, especially if the enemy's not ready for it. And the trait, the Windborne Daggers that we took, allows you to get around and have a little more, actually a fair amount of more mobility than a lot of other characters for a longer duration, because this is just a permanent 15% or 25% increase. So that is about it for the rotations and the cooldowns for this particular build. Again, it's a lot easier to handle than like the arcane build. It's much easier to keep track of where everything is, because your elementals are pretty reasonably intelligent. At least they'll attack whatever you attack. And really, if you just keep these vapor blades going and just keep those stacks up, and then manage to pull off one of your ice storm combos on them, it's great. One thing to also mention is you can use the ice bow for more than ice storm and deep freeze. Your frost fan is great for getaways and support to keep enemies off yourself or your allies, because it's an AoE chill, and that chill doesn't last for very long, but it can be just enough to have someone get away. And then frost volley we pair with deep freeze. So I would suggest trying to get at least one use out of the last 4 skills on a frostbow before you drop it. You don't need to use all the charges. Again, you want to try to pair it mostly with Ice Storm, so you get those huge spikes in AoE damage. Like that. Again, a lot of damage going out here. And that was without any stacks of vulnerability or any other conditions. So, I believe that's it. That's all we have for this build. Again, super simple. We don't rotate out of water for this. The cooldown management is if you find yourself with any downtime between any of the other skills, again, you just want to be throwing out stacks of vulnerability for you and your allies. That's pretty much all this build is. And then popping a cleansing wave when you and your team need it. Healing, and it removes 1 condition, so be sure to keep track of that. That's it. That's all this build is. That is the Ice Witch build that I've been running for a while. Again, to help people, especially in dungeons with people, groups that I don't particularly play with a lot or don't know. PvP, it's been okay. It's been pretty successful. There's definitely better builds. In fact, one of the builds I'm going to cover later is the meta PvP for Elementalist. And then I think we'll move on to a different class for a bit, since I play Elementalist the most. And by the most, I mean pretty much always. It's certainly what I know the best. But that is it for this particular build. I think we will go... I will cover the meta, and then I think we'll move on to probably Mesmer, I think is what we'll move on to next. So, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. In your hand, like this, someone else can pick one up here, spawns one in your hand, and then it replaces your skill bar here. So it gives us AoE abilities like that. Water arrow, which heals us, and then wherever that arrow lands, it'll heal people around it. Its damage is pretty minimal, but it's not too bad. Again, this is mainly for support.